The laundry room was warm, the scent of fresh detergent lingering in the air as I folded the last of the towels. The hum of the dryer filled the space, a steady background noise that made the room feel even smaller, more enclosed. I reached for another piece of clothing, smoothing the fabric between my hands before folding it neatly into the pile. It was late, later than I usually did chores, but sometimes it was easier this way. Easier to focus, easier to think, easier to ignore the weight of an empty house. The repetitive motion of folding, stacking, and sorting had a way of keeping my mind still, giving me something to do with my hands when there wasn't anything else to distract me. I barely heard the sound of the door opening until it was too late. I turned my head, my breath catching slightly as I saw him standing there. My neighbor's son. Tall, lean, the kind of confidence that came effortlessly, like he was used to walking into rooms without knocking. His gaze flickered to the laundry in my hands, then back up to my face, his smirk slow, unhurried. The dim light overhead cast sharp shadows across his jawline, accentuating the sharp angles of his face. "Didn't think anyone would be up this late," he murmured, stepping further inside. I exhaled, placing the folded towel onto the growing stack. "I could say the same about you." He shrugged, his hands slipping into the pockets of his jeans. "Needed some air." Saw the light on. Something about the way he said it sent a ripple through me, subtle but undeniable. The air between us shifted, the small space suddenly feeling even smaller. The warmth from the dryer, the quiet hum of the spinning drum, the faint scent of fresh linen, it all mixed together, making the moment feel heavier than it should have. I cleared my throat, turning back to the laundry. "Well, I'm almost done." "No rush." I stilled for just a second, my fingers tightening slightly around the fabric before I forced myself to keep folding. "I'm sure you have better things to do than hang out in a laundry room." He chuckled, low and amused. "Maybe." I heard the soft scuff of his shoes against the tile as he shifted his weight. He wasn't leaving. He was just standing there, watching. Not in a way that felt intrusive, but in a way that made me hyper-aware of every movement, every breath, every inch of space between us. "You do this often?" he asked after a beat. I glanced at him. "Do what?" "Stay up late. Fold laundry." A small smile tugged at my lips. "I do laundry whenever I have time. Night just happens to be quiet." "I get that." He leaned back slightly against the doorframe, his posture lazy, but there was something in his gaze, curious, searching. "Some things are easier at night." I swallowed, suddenly aware of the dryness in my throat. "Yeah, I guess they are." The conversation was nothing, small talk, casual words exchanged between two people who had no reason to be standing in the same room at this hour. And yet, something about it made my skin prickle, made my heart beat just a little too slow, a little too heavy. The sound of the dryer's timer beeped, a sharp reminder of reality. I turned, opening the door, feeling the rush of warm air as I reached in to pull out the last of the clothes. The fabric was still soft, fresh from the heat, and I busied myself with shaking out a shirt, anything to distract from the weight of his stare still lingering on me. "You sure I can't help?" His voice was closer now. Not too close, but enough that I could hear the shift in it, low, easy, like he wasn't really asking. I forced a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "I think I can manage." Another pause. Then, "You always say no this easily?" The question made me freeze for half a second. My fingers tightened around the fabric before I smoothed it out again, forcing myself to stay steady. "Depends on what's being asked." His smirk deepened. "Fair enough." The air between us thickened, stretched. I felt the slow curl of something I wasn't ready to name, something that settled in the space between words, between glances, between the hum of the dryer and the soft shuffle of fabric. I should have finished folding. Should have walked past him, ended the moment before it became something more. But I didn't. Instead, I let it linger. The weight of the silence settled between us, stretching longer than it should have. The warmth from the dryer still lingered in the air, making the small laundry room feel even more enclosed. He hadn't moved from where he stood, but somehow his presence felt closer now, like the space between us had quietly diminished without either of us acknowledging it. I exhaled, my fingers brushing over the soft fabric of the shirt in my hands. "You're still here." His smirk didn't fade. "Notice that, did you?" I turned, meeting his gaze fully this time. Most people don't hang out in laundry rooms for fun. Maybe I'm not most people. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. There was something about the way he looked at me, steady, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. The quiet hum of the dryer had stopped, but the tension in the air only seemed to grow thicker, wrapping around us in a way that made my skin feel warmer than it should. I folded the shirt with careful precision, stacking it neatly on top of the pile. "You should probably go." "Should I?" My fingers tightened slightly around the fabric. "It's late." "You're still up." "That's different." His brow lifted slightly. "How?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure what answer I was looking for, but I knew whatever was happening right now, this quiet shift, this lingering moment, it wasn't just small talk anymore. He stepped forward, just enough that I could feel the faintest trace of his presence closer to me. "You want me to leave?" The words hung between us, heavy and waiting. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't teasing. It was just a question, simple, direct. And I didn't have an answer. I wet my lips, shifting slightly. Before I could finish, the overhead light flickered slightly, a brief, barely noticeable dimming before it steadied again. The moment stretched further, like the universe itself was hesitating, waiting to see what would happen next. His gaze never wavered. "I'll go if you want me to." A quiet pulse echoed through me, low and insistent. I should have said yes, should have nodded, should have given him the out he was offering me. But I didn't. Instead, I let the moment sit. Let the silence stretch just a little longer. His smirk softened into something else, something quieter, something more unreadable. "Didn't think so." I exhaled a slow breath, my pulse steady but thick beneath my skin. "You're awfully sure of yourself." He tilted his head slightly. "Not really. Just reading the room." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "That's a dangerous thing to do." "Depends on the room." My fingers brushed against the edge of the counter, grounding myself against something solid. "And what do you think this room is telling you?" His gaze flickered over me, slow, deliberate. "That you're thinking about something." "Am I?" "Yeah." His voice dropped just slightly, softer now. "And I don't think it has anything to do with laundry." The warmth in the room felt heavier, denser, like the air itself was holding its breath. The scent of detergent mixed with something else, something unspoken, something neither of us was willing to name just yet. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "You should really go." "Maybe." He didn't move. "Do you want me to?" I hesitated. Again. He noticed. His smirk returned, just the faintest trace of amusement tugging at his lips. "Didn't think so." I let out a slow breath, my fingers curling slightly against the fabric of the folded shirt beside me. "This is a bad idea." "Probably." And yet, I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Because he was still watching me, still waiting, still standing there as if the moment wasn't unraveling between us, threading through the quiet space like something inevitable. "You think too much," he murmured finally. I let out a quiet laugh. "And you don't think enough. Maybe that's why we're still standing here." My stomach flipped, slow and unsteady. "And why is that?" His smirk deepened just slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "Because neither of us is moving." The words settled between us, final and unshaken. And as I stood there, pulse steady but loud in my ears, I realized he was right. And I wasn't sure what that meant anymore.